everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty. If you're new here, my name is Melanie. Welcome, welcome. And for my returning art and craft friends, I'm so glad you're taking another creative break with me today. Today I'm going to be sharing a couple snowman ideas using some wooden items that are from my stash. And then I'm going to be showing you a DIY home idea using a wooden frame that I purchased from my local Dollar General store. Today I'm a part of the What Would You Make YouTube collaboration. We have two hosts for this event. We have Brenda with Rustic and Lace DIY, and Christine with Divine Design, as well as a guest host, Crafting My Best Life with Lisa. Now you're going to find the links to their channels inside of my description box, as well as the playlist of all the other creators who are participating today. You're definitely going to want to check out their channels. They're a super creative bunch, as well as the playlist. There's going to be so many creative ideas shared today. So take some time and click that playlist. I'm sure you're going to be inspired to create something fun for your home for this winter and holiday season. Well, let's go ahead and we'll start these fun little wooden snowmen.
Snowman I'm creating is from a Pinterest pin that I saw, and it inspired me to create this. I love the idea of using the paper doily, but of course the paper doily was a little thin and a little fragile to use, so I took some chalk paint and plaster color and painted the front and the back, and it really did add to the strength of the paper. Once I had it painted, I wanted to go ahead and bring out that doily texture a little bit more. So I had some concentrated instant coffee that I leave on the top of my desk, and then I can just add water to it and reconstitute it. And I use that as kind of a staining agent on my paper doily. So I put some in the middle and around the edges, and then to soften that line work, I went back in with my makeup sponge and then just tapped a little bit more of that plaster color on the top to soften that line in the middle. And then to refocus the attention on the edge, I went ahead and used a little bit more of that coffee stain just on the edge to bring out that very pretty detail of the edging of my little paper doily. In the end, I thought it looked really pretty to have that texture, and the paint really did stiffen up the paper well. So it's a good way to do these paper doily snowmen. Now for the nose and for the hat, I created some cardboard pieces. If you're using cardboard, once you have your pieces all cut out, go ahead and take a little bit of water on the top of your cardboard, let it moisten up, and then you can go ahead and remove the top layer of your cardboard easily and create these pieces. Once I had my pieces all cut out, I went ahead and painted them in some chalk paint. Pumpkin was the color that I used for my nose, and then the hat I just used a black. I did put a little bit of that black paint on the back of my hat as well. It just helped so the cardboard didn't curl up too much. Once I had my pieces all painted, I wanted to add a little bit more color by adding some wax on that. The Waverly wax in the dark color worked really well on my orange nose. I love the patina that it creates over this orange color. So I basically brushed it on and then I wiped it off. I'm going to be adding a few more layers onto my nose once my wax dries, but this was my first step. And for my hat, I did the same thing. I went ahead and I applied the wax on the top of the front of my hat, on the band, and on the hat part. When I applied the paint on both the nose and the hat and the brim of my hat, I did apply it irregular, so I do have some of the plain cardboard that is showing through. The plain cardboard is going to absorb the wax differently and create a nice texture on my hat. Once I had the wax on, I used my sponge again, my makeup sponge, went down into the grooves and wiped some of it out, and then went back into my black paint and put some on the tops. And then I also added a little bit of the white just to add a little bit more texture, or pop the texture out actually, so I could see it a little bit more. I put the white and the black all at the same time. I also went back into my nose with the makeup sponge and applied a little bit more of the orange color right on the top, and then also added a little bit of white just as an accent to bring out that cardboard texture even a little bit more. I really do like the look of these cardboard pieces, and I think it's going to make this snowman look really cute. After my hat pieces had dried, I took the cardboard and I kind of crunched it up at the top just to add a little bit more character to my hat so that it wasn't just such a straight lines. I like that look of being a little bit crumpled look. Now to create some rosy cheeks for my snowman, I took those two colors, more of a red, bright red, and an orange red, and combined them together to make my cheek color. I like to go ahead and just put a little bit of paint on my brush, then I rub my brush inside of my hand until it feels dry, and then I know I've removed enough paint to create these little blush look that I like to create for my snowmen. You can always add more paint. It's just harder to take it off once you have it on there. So blushing that brush inside of my hand really does help take enough of the paint off so I can create these cute little cheeks. I set my pieces out how I thought I wanted them to be before I were to draw my eyes on. I didn't want to glue any of my pieces until I had this decided of where I wanted to have my eyes. When I draw my eyes, I like to do ovals, but I do like to have the ovals kind of slant in, the tops do, and I just like that look for how to create eyes. I'm just using some black paint, acrylic paint, with a round brush with a nice sharp tip edge. I usually put a little bit of paint on, and then off to my side I dab my brush off, making sure that the paint is staying at the tip of my brush. And that really does help create these little oval eyes really easily. Once I had the eyes painted, I gave them a little bit of time to dry because I was going to be starting the shading process on around my eyes. To create the shading, I was going to be using the Decor Art Raw Umber color. This is called floating color. For the floating medium I'm using, it's just simply water. You want to dip your brush into your water, go ahead and tap it on some paper towel until you see the shine gone. Pick up just a little bit on the tip of your brush, and then it's called walking your color across your paper. So you're going to just go ahead and brush your color back and forth, and that's going to blend your color across your brush. And that's going to help create those lines that go from dark to light and create your shadows. Once I had the dark part around my shadowing done, now I was going to do the same technique but on the inside of my eyes using white. So I just tipped my brush in water first, tapped it on my towel until I didn't see a shine, add just a little bit of that color on the edge, and create my white float. Then to do the blue part of the eye, I was using the Bahama blue. I wanted to make sure, give my white paint a little bit of time to dry, and then I went ahead and floated my Bahama blue color in the same way I had just done my white. This creates a really pretty look for an eye. If you'd like to learn more about how to paint the style of whimsical painting, come over to my channel. On Tuesdays, I do YouTube tutorials on how to paint some different looks, and mostly it's a whimsical style. To add the little highlights, I used a stylus tool. I created the little highlight dots. If you put highlights on the outside of one eye, you need to put them on the inside of the other eye. And that's how you create that little bring him to life look of the snowman. To add even a little bit more character to the snowman, I went ahead and took some black paint, added some water to thin it down, took a small round brush and created some eyebrows on the top, and then gave him some wispy little eyelashes at the bottom. It does add to the cuteness factor up to this little guy, and he's starting to come to life. To put the last finishing touch on his face, I repositioned his nose, took the end of my paintbrush and added a little bit of white, and added 2 little bright highlight dots on his cheeks, just to give him a little bit of happy glow on those cheeks. And I think he looks pretty good. I wanted to go ahead and mount this snow guy on this little chalkboard that I had purchased at my dollar store. I wanted to age down the frame just a little bit, so I used the Waverly wax, simply brushed it on, and then just wiped it off with a paper towel. It just was going to add to the more primitive, aged look to this little chalkboard frame, and it worked perfectly to add the color. To go ahead and glue my face down, I went ahead and just used a little bit of hot glue and tacked it down. Kind of put it at an angle so it wasn't straight on because I wanted my hat to have a little bit of a sideways angle. Once I had the head positioned correctly, I could go ahead and put my nose on. When putting the nose down, I wanted it to the far side of my eyes and then coming across my face. To create the smile, I wanted to use buttons, and I like having thread in my buttons, so I used a little bit of crochet thread to thread my buttons and give it that finished look. Then it was time to put my hat on. I went ahead and glued my hat and tacked it down at the bottom and the top, and making sure that I had enough glue in some areas that would connect to that little frame of my chalkboard. And then when I put my brim on, I didn't want to glue it all the way across solid because I wanted to be able to put some greens inside of there and decorate up my hat. So I mostly centered my glue on each side of the edge, allowing my hat brim to be loose so I could apply some of the greenery inside. This is the time I take out whatever I might have for little bits of pieces inside of my scrapper boxes of leftover items that are probably left over from last year or just inside of my stash. This little stick with the rusty stars, I bought it it was just a little piece from my thrift store that was attached to something else, and I love the little sticks and the little rusty stars, so I brought it home with me knowing I'd probably use it on something, and I like the idea of adding the little rusty quality to this little piece. These little balls, they're made from felt. I'm sure I got it from a pick that was from Joann Fabrics. I live in a very small town, so I either buy my things at Joann Fabrics or Walmart. So if you see anything, that's probably where I got it, or perhaps at my local thrift store. I usually always check at my thrift store to see what they might have for little bits of pieces of this and that might work for the seasons. And as a finishing step, you might think it's silly, but I do keep all of my little bits of threads too. From when I whip my fabric, I like to keep those little bits of thread, and I like to add that to maybe to create a little bit of a bow look, or even perhaps a little bit of a nest look. So I had a little bit of pieces of that thread, and I went ahead and I added it to the very bottom, and I think it kind of looked like a little bit of a nest, or it just finished off that area really well. To finish off the bottom of my snowman, I wanted to create a bow using some coffee-stained cotton fabric for the bottom. I ripped it so I could have those little frayed edges, which adds to that whimsical primitive look, and then I used some ticking fabric, some red and white fabric that has also been coffee-stained and baked in my oven to get those darker looks. I'm not the best at making bows, but with this bow dabber, it really does help having almost like a third hand to help create these bows. You can see me twisting the fabric and bringing it across to make sure that I have the printed side facing up. A little trick I learned is that when you pull that fabric up, make sure that when you're tying it, don't tie it all the way tight. Give yourself a little bit of room to be able to go ahead and open up those little loops. So then you will have room to do that before you were to pull the jute twine even tight. To add even a little bit more character to this bow, I went ahead and clipped my fabric on the edges that were the tails, and I ripped the tails to create even a little bit more whimsical nature to this bow style. It's going to look perfect here. I do add a few more details, but it'll show up at the final review in the end when I show you what the snowman looks like, all displayed on my fireplace. DIY number 2 is a shelf sitter that I created using a wooden frame from my Dollar General store. I look for frames that have been glued and not nailed. I can apply the heat and then press the edges and then have that back piece release from that glued area. I take my paper and then I would go ahead and trace around what was inside of that frame. So it's going to sit right on the inside, looking like it was originally a part of the frame and not added on later. I went ahead and I just copied off a free image from my computer of a Christmas song. And then I applied it using the glue stick all the way around the edges. It was just copy paper, so it stuck fairly well. To age my paper, I used the Ranger ink in the colors Ground Espresso and Vintage Photo. I did have a little bit more wrinkling than what I thought I liked. I don't mind having wrinkles, but I kind of wished I would have maybe used my iron to iron it down just a little bit. But in the end, I did like the wrinkles, so I'm okay with that vintage look. I had a stash of wooden buttons in my stash in red, green, and kind of a natural color, so I went ahead and threaded those with some thread and just glued it to the back so I would have a nice flat surface to be able to glue my buttons down. To add a little bit more interest to this, I decided to go ahead and watercolor it. On my channel, I do lots of tutorials on watercolor. Those usually come live on Tuesdays for my YouTube tutorial series for painting and drawing. You're welcome to come over anytime and see what I do on my channel for my drawing and painting as well. If you're interested in watercolor, it's a great way to learn. I do easy steps, easy to follow along, and great for beginners or even a seasoned painter as well. I'm painting these little trees on there. I believe the name of the song was The Christmas Tree. When doing these little trees, you just want to basically go back and forth. There's nothing too fancy about painting them. What makes them look good is in the end is if you have a couple different shades of color, so though they're not all the same. So then you're going to have more of a little bit of a depth to your picture. So switch up your greens when you're using them and just go back and forth. Now this isn't watercolor, it's just copy paper, but it's going to work fine too to create this little piece. I put the frame on, so I made sure I had all the green trees going down to the bottom and anchoring and not just floating up high. Once I had the trees kind of the way I thought I wanted them, I was going to create a swag look at the top. I used the Micron pens. Micron pens are one of my favorites. They are a permanent ink once they dry, and they work perfect for this type of small line drawing. I thought I was just going to freehand it and put my ink on, but who am I kidding? I really am a pencil girl. I like to draw my things first and then go on with my ink. So I drew my little swag line with my pencil first and then went back with my pen and drew it over and created little bows to make it look like they were attaching my string. My wooden buttons are going to act like little hanging ornaments, so I positioned them where I thought I would want them, drew some lines up and then back down. Just created an irregular line all the way across to attach my little button ornaments onto my little swag line. And at the very tops, I created little bows to make it look like they were tied at the top. Then once I had all of my little ornaments hung, I went ahead and moved my buttons down just a tiny bit and created little tops to make them look like they were ornaments. And then all I did was simply basically add some hot glue on and glue my buttons on. This is a super simple project to do, really quick and easy, and very pretty. I went ahead and retacked my frame area using some hot glue and then just put my little frame back in the frame. And if you didn't know that it had a different picture on it and had been looking totally different, you wouldn't know it now. It looks like it belongs and that it was an original part of the frame. I took a few of my this and that holiday items and glued them into the corner just to finish it off. I'll show you in the end for the final view. It looks really pretty on my mantle. DIY number 3, I upcycled an old board that I had inside of my stash, and I'm going to make this into a cute little snowman. This little guy is going to get a 3D nose, and I'm going to create it using a brown paper sack. Brown paper sacks have a seam in it, so you want to make sure the seam side is facing down, and then go ahead and trace around your pattern. Once your pattern is all traced, you're going to go ahead and start gluing. You're going to want to start at the tip of your nose. Go ahead and do a little bit of glue on each side and glue your pieces together. You want to make sure your seams are glued together because we're going to be making a pillow out of this little nose. So we're going to need to be able to add stuffing or polyfill to the inside of my nose. So I basically just go along each side of my nose slowly and then make sure my seams are all the way closed. Once they're closed, I just trim it up just a little bit to make sure my edges are kind of matching a little bit better, and then condition my paper by squeezing it back and forth, and that's going to create more of a fabric feel to my nose. I used Decoart's Spiced Pumpkin color to add the orange color to my nose. When adding the paint color, you don't want to oversaturate your paper, so you're kind of doing more of a dry brush technique when you're adding the orange. Do it on the front and on the back of your nose. Give it a little bit of dry and then recondition your paper, and that's just going to bring back that fabric feel to your little nose. Now it's time to go ahead and add the fabric fill. I used a polyfill inside of my little nose. Use whatever you might have. I used a wooden skewer to be able to push my fabric fill down to the bottom. Be careful when you're doing this so that you don't pop a hole into your nose. But go ahead and fill this, and you might notice your little area needs a little bit more glue. Just simply re-glue the seams if that's what you need to do. But at the very end, I just push it down and then glue it all the way closed. And I have a little pillow carrot nose. To add a little bit more color to my nose, I took a little bit more of that concentrated coffee mix that I had used before on my other snowman nose. I put some of that on there too. I used a little bit more of ink on the edges in the ground espresso, and once it was dry, I gave it a little bit of a squish just to add a little bit more character to that little nose. To begin the underpainting colors of my little snowman, I just chose a gold, a brown, and a warm reddish brown color, and used my palette knife and skimmed across those colors underneath. He kind of looks like he rolled in the mud right now, but we're going to make him white in the end. Once the undercolors were dry, I took some white paint in my palette knife and I skimmed across those underneath colors. By doing this, I'm going to have some highs and lows. I'm going to see some of those little shades of those colors underneath, but creating just more of a primitive look for my snowman. I had an older wooden ruler in my stash I had found at my thrift store, and I wanted to use that for the brim of this guy's hat. I love the aged look of the ruler, and I thought it would work perfect for this project. Once I had the hat brim line drawn, I was able to go ahead and put my nose down and then draw my eyes. I was going to be doing the same style of eyes in that oval shape, and my nose was going to be off to the side. I'm going to be using some black acrylic paint to create the eyes with. Often I add a little bit of water to my paint to thin it down, and this just allows for me to make those little shapes a lot easier with just a tiny bit more water into my paint. I put my paintbrush into the paint, I twist it and turn it towards me, and that just helps create a sharper point on my brush and allows me to make those shapes so much easier. Once I have the black areas done, I let them dry, and I'm going to begin that floating shadow process like I did on my other snowman. I dip my brush into the water, go ahead and tap it on my paper towel so I don't see a shine, tip it on the edge, and then go ahead and go back and forth on my paper, walking my color across my brush, and then going across on the edge of my areas to make my shadows. You can see how the color goes from dark to light. I put the shadow on the outside of one eye, turn my item upside down because I'm right-handed, and it's just so much easier to paint that direction. You can go over your areas and if you need to again a second time to tweak your shadows. I wanted to go ahead and create a deeper blue eye this time, so instead of using white, I used the Bahama blue to create the lightest shade of blue, and went ahead and floated that color on the inside of my eyes. When creating the highlights, you want to go ahead and choose whatever side you're going to on one eye, and then you're going to do the opposite on the other eye. So on the inside, I created a blue shape, and then I had to do it on the outside of my opposite eye. I wanted to make this a deeper blue eye, so I went ahead and I used the Apple Barrel's Admiral Blue to create a deep blue color on the inside of my eye. I used two different sizes of stylus to create the highlights for the eyes. Use the larger size for the bottom highlights, and then the smaller one for the top highlights. Make sure you're pointing directly above your eyes to create the little dots. It just works much easier if you're right up and down. Again, if you create the dots on the outside on one eye, they need to be on the inside for the other eye. To create the cheeks, I used the Apple Barrel color Tuscan Red. Again, I created my colors just using a flat brush, scrubbing the paint on my hand to make sure it was dry, so then I could go ahead and create those blush looks of cheeks on my face. To finish my eyes, I took a liner brush, and this liner brush has long bristles on it. So I thinned down my paint, and when I put it in the paint, I want to twist it and pull it towards me to create a nice point on my brush. I decided to turn my piece upside down because it's so much easier to pull these little small lines towards you instead of away. And then I also gave him some slanted eyebrows just to add a little bit more character to this little snowman. Took some ink and inked my edges around the front, and I did it on the edges as well because you might be able to see it when he's setting up. It just added a little bit more primitive look and finished him off nicely. I thought this guy might look a little cute with some freckles, so I took the Tuscan Red and added a few freckles to his face. To add just a little bit more highlights, I took my liner brush and I did do a very thin line of white paint on the outside and the inside of my eyes, just to add a little bit more highlights. To create his hat, I used the same striped fabric that I had used for my other snowman. It's coffee stained. And then I went ahead and I put the glue across his forehead, just right underneath that line of where I was going to be putting the ruler. Put some glue there, and then tacked it on the edges and all the way around. I used a little Q-tip there to clean up any extra glue. I don't like seeing any extra glue on my projects, so that's just a great way to clean it up a little bit, instead of just using my fingers, as I often do. I went ahead and I tacked it in the back and trying to make sure that my lines were straight up and down, just to be able to give that fabric more of a finished look. And then I went ahead and tacked it at the top and just trying to keep the fabric lines lined up so that it had a finished look on the back. Took a little bit of jute twine and I tied it into the crook of that little handle. So there's a little bit of that knob showing up above because I wanted to be able to hang this if I wanted to. So I was going to be able to have that open at the top so I would be able to hang it if I decided I wanted to hang it besides just sitting on. Glued my little ruler on there. Finished off the hat. I wanted to put a few little greenery pieces at the top, so I just went ahead and seen what I had in my bits and baubles to be able to add to the little top of the hat. Again, I had some strings. These were the red strings from the red fabric, so I keep those too. You never know when you might need a few strings. This guy's going to get buttons for his face as well, for his little smile, so I went ahead and I just glued my nose down, making sure it was off to the side of my eyes, and then I glued my buttons around the edges. This one's I did not add any string to. I guess I got lazy on my project and I didn't want to add all those little strings to my buttons, but it looked okay too. Added that piece of jute twine to the top just in case I wanted to be able to hang it. Then to finish off the hat, I decided I wanted it a little bit more of that same rugged look like I had created on my other bow for my other snowman. I went ahead and made some little cuts and then ripped the edges to fray the edges just to give him kind of more of a whimsical top to his hat. Cute, right? And then I decided maybe he could use a little sparkle. And what sparkles better than diamond dust? Nothing really. So I added a little bit of Mod Podge to the top of his nose, not all the way across, but just here and there, and sprinkled some diamond dust on there. Right now it kind of looks like snow because the glue isn't dried, but in the end it had a beautiful little sparkle, and I can't wait to show you what they all look like on my fireplace. And here they are looking as cute as can be. My first things out for the winter and Christmas season. Give me a thumbs up if I might have inspired you to create something new for your winter and Christmas season. Leave me a comment and let me know which one might be your favorite. If you're new to my channel and you like to do art and crafts, come on over and see what I have to offer. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Hopefully you'll come back and see me again, and next time you'll create right along with me. Make sure you check out that playlist inside of the description area for the What Would You Make collaboration. I'm sure you're going to be inspired by all of the creative ideas shared.